The crimson sunrise painted the vast Oklahoma Territory sky as Tessa Aldridge clutched the rough-hewn bedpost, her knuckles turning white with each wave of pain that crashed through her swollen body. April 1889 had brought not only the great land run to the newly opened territory, but also the imminent arrival of her child, a child who would never know its father. "Not now," she whispered through clenched teeth, her brow slick with perspiration despite the cool spring morning. The nearest town with a proper doctor was miles away, and the midwife who had promised to attend the birth had sent word yesterday that she'd fallen ill herself. Tessa was utterly alone on the homestead claim she and her husband had staked just weeks before his death. Another contraction seized her, stronger than the last. Tessa stumbled to the cabin door, desperate for air. Beyond her modest porch lay the rolling prairie, beautiful and indifferent to her plight. The nearest neighbor was over 2 miles away, too far to reach in her condition. As the pain subsided momentarily, Tessa heard it, hoofbeats approaching from the west. She shielded her eyes against the rising sun, making out the silhouette of a rider. Hope and fear warred within her chest. "Hello, the house," a deep voice called. "Here." Tessa managed to cry out before another contraction doubled her over, sending her to her knees on the porch. The rider spurred his mount forward, covering the final distance at a gallop. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his tall frame unfolding from the saddle. Tessa glimpsed a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, concern etched into features tanned by years under the open sky. "Madam," the stranger approached cautiously, taking in her condition with a quick glance. "You're in a bad way." "The baby," Tessa gasped. "It's coming and I'm alone." The man removed his hat, revealing hair the color of sun-bleached wheat. "Name's Kieran Forrester, madam. I was riding to Oklahoma City when I spotted your cabin." He hesitated only a moment before decision hardened his features. "Let's get you inside." With surprising gentleness, Kieran helped Tessa to her feet and guided her back into the cabin. The simplicity of the interior told its own story, a woman trying to carve out existence from the unforgiving frontier. The bed in the corner was already prepared with clean linens, a wash basin beside it. "My husband," Tessa managed between breaths, "he died 6 weeks ago, thrown from his horse." Kieran nodded, his expression grave as he helped her to the bed. "I've got some experience with calving and foaling. Even helped deliver my sister's baby once when the doctor couldn't make it through a blizzard." His voice was steady, matter-of-fact, but his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. "Don't rightly know if that qualifies me, but I'm all you've got right now." Tessa looked up into the stranger's face, the clear blue eyes, the firm set of his jaw, and found herself trusting him despite everything. "I don't have much choice, Mr. Forrester." "Kieran," he corrected, rolling up his sleeves. "Now we need water boiling and whatever clean cloth you've got." The next few hours passed in a haze of pain for Tessa. Kieran moved with purpose around the small cabin, his large hands surprisingly capable as he prepared for the birth. He spoke in low, soothing tones, telling her about his cattle drive from Texas, about the open land he hoped to claim near the newly forming Oklahoma City. His voice anchored her through the worst of the pain. "You're doing fine," he assured her as the contractions came faster and harder. "Just like a mare I once had, stubborn as they come but strong enough to weather anything." Despite her agony, Tessa managed a weak smile. "Not sure if that's a compliment," Kieran chuckled, the sound warm in the tension-filled room. "Highest praise I know how to give, madam." When the moment came, Kieran's calm never wavered. His steady hands guided Tessa through the final, excruciating push that brought her child into the world. The cabin filled with the thin, indignant wail of new life. "You've got yourself a son, Mrs. Aldridge," Kieran announced, his voice thick with emotion as he carefully cleaned and wrapped the squalling infant. A strong one by the sound of it. Tessa reached out with trembling arms as Kieran placed her son against her chest. The tiny face, red and wrinkled, was the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "You've had quite a journey already." She looked up to find Kieran watching them, something unreadable passing across his features before he turned away to clean up. The sun had traversed the sky during her labor, and now afternoon light streamed through the small window, illuminating motes of dust and the profile of the man who had delivered her child. "I don't know how to thank you," Tessa said softly. Kieran shook his head. "No need for thanks." "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Tessa replied with certainty. "Not anyone." That night, Kieran slept on a bedroll near the fireplace, unwilling to leave the new mother and child alone so soon after the birth. In the quiet hours, as her son slept peacefully beside her, Tessa studied the cowboy's face in repose. The hard lines softened in sleep, revealing a younger man than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, only a few years older than her own 24 years. Morning brought clarity and the realization of her vulnerability. A woman alone with a newborn had slim chances on the frontier. "I should stay a few days," Kieran said over coffee as the baby dozed in a makeshift cradle he'd fashioned from a drawer. "Make sure you're both doing all right before I move on." Tessa wanted to refuse, to show the same independence that had driven her west with her husband, but pragmatism won out. "I would be grateful," she admitted. "Just until I get my strength back." 2 days stretched into a week. Kieran repaired the roof that had begun to leak, chopped enough firewood to last a month, and fixed the chicken coop that predators had damaged. He showed no sign of impatience, seeming content with the temporary detour from his plans. On the 8th day, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tessa finally asked the question that had been troubling her. "Don't you need to get to Oklahoma City? For the land claim you mentioned?" Kieran stared out at the horizon, his profile outlined against the deepening purple sky. "The good land's likely taken by now, but there'll be other opportunities." "Because of us," Tessa said, guilt coloring her words. "You missed your chance because you stayed to help us." Kieran turned to her, his expression gentle. "Some things matter more than a piece of land, Mrs. Aldridge." "Tessa," she corrected softly. "After what we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Tessa," he repeated, the name sounding different in his mouth. That night, as she nursed her son, whom she had named Samuel after her father, Tessa found herself considering possibilities she hadn't dared contemplate. Kieran was kind, capable, and honorable. In the short time he'd been at her homestead, he'd shown more consideration than many men would give their own families. But he was also a wanderer, a man with his own dreams, and she was a new widow with a fresh wound in her heart and a child to raise. The timing couldn't be worse for the feelings beginning to stir within her. The next morning, Kieran announced his intention to ride to the nearest town for supplies. "You're running low on just about everything," he explained as he saddled his horse. "And I figure the little one could use some proper baby things, not just makeshift arrangements." Tessa stood in the doorway, Samuel cradled against her shoulder. "We'll manage. You've already done more than enough." Kieran adjusted his hat, squinting against the bright morning sun. "I'll be back before nightfall." The certainty in his voice, the absence of goodbye, gave Tessa a fragile hope that she dared not examine too closely. True to his word, Kieran returned as the sun was setting, his saddlebags bulging with supplies and a small wooden crate strapped behind his saddle. To Tessa's surprise, he had managed to find not only the necessities but also a tiny gown for Samuel and a package of peppermint sticks that he presented to her with an almost boyish shyness. "Never know what a new mother might be craving," he said with a small smile. "My sister had a powerful sweet tooth after her children were born." Tessa unwrapped the candy, the scent bringing back memories of Christmas mornings and county fairs from her childhood in Illinois. "How thoughtful," she murmured, touched by the simple gesture. In the crate was a collection of items that spoke volumes about Kieran's consideration. A rattle carved from smooth wood, a small quilt suitable for a baby, and several glass bottles with rubber nipples. "For when he's a bit older," Kieran explained, noticing her examination of the bottles. or if you need someone else to feed him while you rest." Tessa felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I don't know what I've done to deserve such kindness from a stranger." Kieran's gaze held her steadily. "We're hardly strangers now, Tessa." The truth of that statement hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Over the following days, a routine developed. Kieran handled the outdoor chores, tending to his horse and Tessa's 2 milk cows, mending fences and preparing the small garden plot for planting. Tessa focused on regaining her strength and caring for Samuel, whose robust cries and healthy appetite were sources of ongoing pride. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking long after they should have retired. Kieran spoke of his years working cattle drives, of the death of his parents that had left him rootless, of his dreams to establish something permanent for himself after years of drifting. Tessa shared stories of her journey west with her husband Daniel, their hopes for a new beginning, and the devastating accident that had left her a widow before her child was even born. "Daniel was a good man," she said one night, her voice soft with memory. "He would have been a wonderful father." Kieran nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "It takes courage to continue what you both started, especially alone." "Not alone," Tessa said before she could stop herself. "Not anymore." Their eyes met across the small room, and for a moment Tessa thought Kieran might say something more. Instead, he cleared his throat and stood. "Getting late," he said. "Little Samuel will have you up before the sun, no doubt." 2 weeks after Samuel's birth, they received their first visitors, a neighboring family who had heard from the storekeeper in town about the new baby and the cowboy, who'd taken up temporary residence at the Aldridge homestead. Martha Jenkins, a robust woman with 5 children of her own, assessed the situation with knowing eyes as her husband Thomas discussed crop prospects with Kieran outside. "You could do worse," Martha commented bluntly as she expertly swaddled Samuel after examining him. "Strong hands, good with tools, and he looks at that baby like he hung the moon." Tessa flushed. "It's not like that, he just happened by when I needed help." Martha raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Providence has its ways, Tessa." "My Thomas wasn't the man I expected to marry either, but 20 years later, I thank God every day for sending him to me." She handed Samuel back to Tessa. "Just don't wait too long to decide. Good men don't stay available forever, especially out here." The Jenkins visit left Tessa thoughtful. That night, after Samuel had been fed and settled, she found Kieran sitting on the porch steps, whittling a small piece of wood by lantern light. "What are you making?" she asked, sitting beside him. He showed her the partially formed figure of a horse. "Thought Samuel might like a toy when he's older." The simple gesture squeezed Tessa's heart. "You keep doing things like that, and I'll start thinking you plan to stay around to see him grow up." The words hung in the night air, more direct than she had intended. Kieran's hands stilled, and he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Would that be something you'd want?" he asked quietly. Tessa swallowed, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth radiating from his body in the cool evening. "I don't want your pity, Kieran, or your sense of obligation." "Is that what you think this is?" His voice held a trace of hurt. "Pity. Why else would a man give up his plans to help a widow and a child who are nothing to him?" Kieran set aside his carving and turned fully toward her. "You and Samuel have never been nothing to me, Tessa. Not from the moment I found you." The honesty in his face made her heart race. "What are we to you then?" Instead of answering with words, Kieran reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His calloused fingers were gentle against her cheek, and Tessa found herself leaning into his touch. "I never believed in fate before," he murmured. "Always figured a man made his own way, but finding you that day." He shook his head slightly. "It changed something in me." Tessa's throat tightened with emotion. "It's too soon," she whispered, though she didn't move away, "for both of us. You have dreams of your own land, and I'm still mourning Daniel." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm not asking for promises, Tessa. Just a chance to see where this leads." His thumb traced the curve of her jawline. "I can be patient. From inside the cabin, Samuel's cry broke the moment. Tessa stood reluctantly. "He's hungry." Kieran rose as well. "Go tend to him, I'll be here." The simple assurance followed Tessa inside, warming her more than it should have. The days lengthened as April gave way to May. Samuel grew stronger, his tiny features becoming more defined, sometimes reminding Tessa painfully of Daniel, other times showing expressions that seemed uniquely his own. Kieran continued to make improvements to the homestead, never mentioning departure, though they both knew he had his own future to consider. News reached them of a community gathering planned in the newly established settlement 15 miles away, a chance for the scattered homesteaders to meet, trade goods, and share information. After some deliberation, Tessa decided they would attend. "Samuel should be introduced to society," she said with a small smile. "And I could use a day away from these four walls." Kieran hitched up the wagon he had repaired, making a comfortable seat for Tessa with extra blankets. Samuel was bundled securely in a sling Kieran had seen native women use, allowing Tessa to keep him close while leaving her hands free. The small settlement bustled with activity when they arrived. Makeshift stalls displayed homemade goods, and a fiddle player entertained a group of children. Tessa felt a surprising surge of joy at the simple pleasure of being among people again, of showing off her healthy son to admiring neighbors. "You must be Mrs. Aldridge," a woman approached, her sharp eyes taking in Kieran standing protectively nearby. "And this must be the miracle baby we've heard about. I'm Harriet Simmons, the school teacher when we get a proper school built, that is." Tessa smiled, adjusting Samuel in his sling. "This is Samuel, yes, and this is Mr. Forrester, who—" She hesitated, unsure how to explain Kieran's presence. "Who delivered the baby when there was no one else to help," Kieran finished smoothly, tipping his hat to Harriet. "And has been helping out at the homestead since." Harriet's eyes widened with interest. How providential, and quite unusual for a cowboy to have such skills. "Necessity teaches quickly," Kieran replied with a modest shrug. "Mrs. Aldridge did all the hard work." The exchange set the tone for the day, as word spread about the circumstances of Samuel's birth and Kieran's role in it. Tessa noticed the speculative glances cast their way, the knowing smiles of the married women, the occasional frown from those who found their arrangement questionable. During the communal meal, the local minister approached their table. Reverend Gideon Powell was a severe-looking man with kind eyes that belied his stern appearance. "Mrs. Aldridge, Mr. Forrester," he greeted them. "I've heard your remarkable story. God works in mysterious ways, bringing help when it's most needed." Tessa nodded. "We've been blessed by Mr. Forrester's assistance." The Reverend studied them both. "I'll be conducting services here every second Sunday, and I'd be honored if you would attend." His gaze lingered on Samuel. "Perhaps we might discuss baptism for the little one." After he moved on, Kieran glanced at Tessa. "Would you want that? For Samuel to be baptized?" The question touched on matters they hadn't discussed: faith, the future, what role Kieran might play in Samuel's life. "Yes," Tessa said after a moment. "Daniel would have wanted it. He was raised Baptist." "And you'd want me there?" Kieran asked, his tone carefully neutral. Tessa met his gaze directly. "You've been part of Samuel's life from his first breath, Kieran. It seems right that you should be there when he's welcomed into the church." Something like relief crossed Kieran's features, followed by a smile that made Tessa's heart skip. The gathering continued into the afternoon with simple competitions: horseshoe throwing, quilting displays, and shooting contests. To Tessa's amusement, Kieran was persuaded to enter the shooting match, where his steady aim won him first prize, a fine leather saddle blanket. "You never mentioned you were a marksman," Tessa teased as they prepared to leave. Kieran secured their few purchases in the wagon. "Never much cause to bring it up. Comes in handy on the trail, though." As Kieran helped Tessa onto the wagon seat, a man approached, his expensive clothes marking him as different from the homesteaders. "Forrester, Kieran Forrester," he called. Kieran turned, his body tensing slightly. "That's me." The stranger extended his hand. Walter Donovan, representative of the Cattlemen's Association, been asking around about experienced hands. He gestured toward the open countryside. We're establishing a large operation about 50 miles south. Need good men who know cattle. Pays excellent. Tessa felt her stomach tighten at the prospect of Kieran leaving. Kieran shook Donovan's hand briefly. Appreciate the offer, but I've got commitments here. Donovan's gaze flickered to Tessa and Samuel. Of course, but if your situation changes, the offer stands for the next month or so. Ask for me in Guthrie. On the journey home, silence stretched between them until Tessa finally spoke. You didn't have to turn down that offer on our account. Kieran's hands were steady on the reins. It wasn't the right opportunity. 50 miles isn't so far, Tessa ventured, though the thought of Kieran leaving made her chest ache. You could visit. Kieran glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Is that what you want, for me to visit? Tessa looked down at Samuel, sleeping peacefully in her arms. I want you to be happy, Kieran. You've put your life on hold for us. Have you considered, Kieran said quietly, that maybe my happiness isn't 50 miles away with a cattle outfit, that maybe I've found something worth more than good wages? The implication hung between them, too significant to ignore. We've known each other such a short time, Tessa whispered. Some people spend years together and never really know each other, Kieran replied, and some recognize what they've found right away. The wagon creaked along the rutted trail as twilight descended. Tessa felt herself at a crossroads, facing a decision she hadn't expected to make again so soon after losing Daniel. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, Kieran added gently. Just for you to consider what you want for your future. For Samuel's future. When they reached the homestead, the familiar silhouette of the cabin against the night sky filled Tessa with a sense of coming home that had been absent since Daniel's death. Kieran helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for today, Tessa said. It was good to get away to see other people. Even if they all think we're courting. Kieran's tone held amusement. Tessa laughed softly. Especially because of that, small communities thrive on speculation. In the dim light from the lantern hanging on the porch, Kieran's face was shadowed, but his eyes reflected the flame as they studied her. Would it be so terrible if we were? Tessa's breath caught. No, she admitted, the truth of it surprising her. Not terrible at all. Kieran stepped closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. Tessa, he murmured, her name a question and a plea with Samuel cradled securely between them. Tessa lifted her face to Kieran's. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative a promise rather than a passion, sweet with possibility. When they parted, Tessa saw in Kieran's eyes the same wonder she felt. We should go inside, she said softly. It's getting cold. The following weeks brought changes to their relationship. The acknowledgement of their growing feelings didn't result in immediate declarations or plans, but rather in a deepening comfort with each other. Kieran began building an addition to the cabin, a proper bedroom for Samuel, as he grew working steadily through the long summer days. They attended the church service together, where Reverend Powell baptized Samuel with Kieran standing proudly beside Tessa. The minister's sermon that day spoke of new beginnings and God's providence, words that seemed particularly meant for them. After the service, they spoke with the Reverend privately. I sense there may be another blessing for this little family on the horizon, the minister said with a knowing smile. Kieran cleared his throat. We're taking things slowly, Reverend. Out of respect for Daniel's memory and to give Samuel time to grow a bit. Powell nodded approvingly. Wisdom often accompanies patience, Mr. Forrester, but don't tarry too long. Life on the frontier is uncertain and happiness should be embraced when found. On a warm June evening, as fireflies danced in the gathering dusk, Kieran and Tessa sat on the porch swing he had built, Samuel sleeping peacefully inside after an exhausting day of discovering his hands could grasp objects. I received a letter today, Tessa said, breaking the comfortable silence. From Daniel's brother in St. Louis. Kieran turned to her, concern crossing his features. Good news, I hope. He wants me to bring Samuel and return east, Tessa explained. Says a woman and child have no business trying to make a go of it out here. The tension in Kieran's jaw was visible. And what do you think? Tessa gazed out at the land she had come to love, the rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers, the small garden now flourishing under their care, the modest herd of cattle Kieran had begun to assemble. This is home now, she said simply. For Samuel, for me. Relief softened Kieran's expression. I'm glad to hear it. Tessa took a deep breath, gathering her courage. There's something else I need to say, Kieran. She turned to face him fully. I know we've been careful with each other, respectful of Daniel's memory and of how quickly all this has happened. But life is short and uncertain, as we both know too well. Kieran took her hands in his touch warm and steady. What are you saying, Tessa? I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. And I don't want to waste any more time pretending otherwise out of some sense of propriety or timing. Joy bloomed across Kieran's face, transforming his features. Tessa, he breathed, squeezing her hands. I've loved you since I watched you bring that boy into the world with more courage than most men show in a lifetime. I just didn't want to rush you. Tessa laughed, tears of happiness blurring her vision. So we've both been being considerate while wanting the same thing. Seems that way, Kieran agreed, his smile radiant in the fading light. This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, only the certainty of two hearts finding their match against all odds. 2 weeks later, Kieran and Tessa were married by Reverend Powell in a simple ceremony attended by their growing circle of neighbors and friends. Martha Jenkins had insisted on baking a proper wedding cake, and Thomas had organized the men to construct tables and benches for the celebration afterward. Samuel, now nearly 3 months old and growing stronger daily, was held by Martha during the ceremony, his wide eyes taking in the gathering with apparent interest. Tessa wore a dress of pale blue cotton that Martha and the other women had helped her make, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Kieran, in a new shirt and the cleanest pair of denims he owned, looked at her as though she were the most precious sight he'd ever beheld. By the power vested in me, Reverend Powell proclaimed with evident satisfaction, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The small crowd erupted in cheers as Kieran pulled Tessa into his arms, sealing their vows with a kiss that promised a lifetime of devotion. The celebration continued into the evening with fiddle music and dancing under the stars. As the night grew late, Tessa found herself seated beside Harriet Simmons, watching Kieran dance with one of the Jenkins girls, Samuel sleeping soundly in a basket nearby. It's a beautiful story, you know, Harriet remarked, the kind people will tell for generations. Tessa raised an eyebrow. What story is that? A woman alone in her hour of need, a stranger appearing just when hope seemed lost, a child bringing two souls together. Harriet smiled. It restores one's faith in divine planning. Tessa watched as Kieran excused himself from the dance and made his way back to her side, his eyes never leaving hers. Yes, she agreed softly. It does exactly that. Later that night, after their well-wishers had departed and they were finally alone, Kieran carried Tessa across the threshold of their home, for it truly was their home now, in every sense. Welcome home, Mrs. Forrester, he murmured against her hair. The name felt right, a new identity that honored both her past and her future. It's good to be home, she replied, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had become everything to her. They checked on Samuel, sleeping peacefully in his cradle, before retiring to their bedroom, the same room where he had been born, where Kieran had first shown the tender care that would eventually win Tessa's heart. I never thought I'd find this, Kieran confessed as they lay together in the darkness. A home, a family, something that was mine to protect and cherish. Tessa rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. And I never thought I'd find love twice in one lifetime. But here we are, Kieran echoed, his arms tightening around her, and here we'll stay. As summer gave way to autumn, the Forrester homestead continued to flourish. Kieran's knowledge of cattle proved invaluable as they expanded their herd, and Tessa's garden yielded enough vegetables to see them through the winter with plenty to share with neighbors. Samuel grew rapidly, his personality emerging more each day. He had Daniel's determined chin, Tessa noted, but Kieran's easy laugh. He showed no preference between his parents, reaching for either with equal delight, though he seemed to save his most impressive accomplishments for when Kieran was watching. He rolled over again. Kieran announced one evening, bursting into the kitchen where Tessa was preparing dinner. Did it 3 times just to show off. Tessa smiled at the pride in her husband's voice. He knows his audience. The bond between Kieran and Samuel deepened daily. Though Kieran was careful to ensure Samuel knew about his birth father through stories, and the few photographs Tessa had, there was no doubt that in all the ways that mattered, Kieran was Samuel's father, the man who would teach him to ride, to fish, to become a good man. On a crisp October morning, as Tessa hung laundry on the line with Samuel watching from a blanket spread nearby, she spotted a rider approaching. She shaded her eyes, recognizing Walter Donovan, the Cattle Association representative they had met months earlier. Kieran emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as he went to meet their visitor. "Forrester," Donovan called, dismounting. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're settling in." His gaze took in the improved homestead, the small herd grazing in the distance, and Tessa with Samuel. "Looks like you've been busy." Kieran extended his hand. "Donovan, good to see you. What brings you this way?" The men spoke for nearly an hour while Tessa prepared coffee and sandwiches. From what she could gather, Donovan was impressed with what Kieran had accomplished and was interested in discussing a potential partnership that would allow them to expand their operation. After Donovan departed, Kieran found Tessa in the kitchen, his expression thoughtful. "He wants us to join the association," Kieran explained, taking Samuel from Tessa's arms and bouncing him gently. "Says we could double our herd with their backing, maybe hire some help." Tessa studied her husband's face. "Is that something you want?" Kieran looked around the home they had built together, at the son who gurgled happily in his arms. "I want security for us, for Samuel, for any other children we might have." A smile tugged at his mouth, "and it would be nice to have help during calving season." Tessa stepped closer, wrapping her arms around both her husband and son. "Then I think you should consider it seriously." As winter approached, bringing with it the promise of long evenings by the fire, Tessa and Kieran made plans for the future: a larger home as their family grew, education for Samuel in the school being built in the settlement, perhaps even a trip east someday to introduce Samuel to his extended family. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and Samuel finally asleep after the excitement of his first Christmas tree, Tessa handed Kieran a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "An early Christmas gift," she explained, her eyes shining. Kieran unwrapped it carefully to find a tiny pair of hand-knitted booties. He looked up at Tessa, understanding dawning on his face. "Are you?" Tessa nodded, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "In June, if the doctor's estimate is correct." With a whoop that threatened to wake Samuel, Kieran lifted Tessa off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down gently and falling to his knees before her. He pressed a reverent kiss to her stomach, then looked up at her with eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never knew it was possible to be this happy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Tessa ran her fingers through his hair, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had come into her life when she needed him most. "Neither did I." In the years that followed, the Forrester family continued to grow and thrive. Samuel was joined by a sister, Catherine, born almost exactly a year after her parents' wedding, and later by twin boys who tested even Kieran's boundless patience. The small cabin expanded into a proper ranch house as the cattle operation prospered under Kieran's guidance. Tessa became known throughout the territory for her skill with medicinal herbs, often assisting at births, just as Kieran had once helped her. On Samuel's 5th birthday, as they watched him blow out the candles on his cake surrounded by siblings and friends, Kieran slipped his arm around Tessa's waist. "You ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. "The day we met." Tessa leaned into his embrace, watching their children Samuel so serious and responsible, Catherine with her father's blue eyes and determined spirit, the twins getting into mischief even at age 2. "Every day," she replied honestly. "It was the beginning of everything." Kieran pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best detour I ever took. Best labor I ever went through," Tessa countered with a smile. As twilight fell and their children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Kieran and Tessa stood on the porch of the home they had built together, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "We've come a long way from that day," Kieran observed, gazing out at the prosperous ranch that stretched before them. Tessa looked up at the man who had delivered her son and then her from loneliness, the man whose steady presence had given her the courage to love again. "And we've still got a lifetime ahead of us." "A lifetime," Kieran agreed, turning to face her. "And I intend to cherish every moment of it with you." Under a sky filled with stars that had witnessed their beginning, Kieran and Tessa sealed this promise as they had sealed so many before with a kiss that spoke of enduring love, of a journey that had started in crisis, but had led to a happiness neither had dared to imagine possible. In the quiet Oklahoma night, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor and the love they had built together, they were home.